Hello! It is I, Jack Frost, awakened from my nap. Oh my. Seems people are really celebrating here right now. Well, in other news, I've awoken from my nap and hopefully I am ready to read you the rest of the story. It's a lot, but I will give it my best attempt. I don't really read too much. It's usually once a year nowadays. But anyway, let's see. I don't want this going on too long. I absolutely love this thing. The skull candle was a gift. Don't you pay no mind to that. Hello, Beppy. Say hello to Beppy, everyone. Don't you just the cutest thing? He's fine. Oh no. Already being difficult. Don't you dare, pesky little caterpillar. And to think I just tamed it. All right. Back to the cricket on the hearth. Where were we? Where should we start back off? Not sure where we should start off. Where did we leave off? Where we left off might be a good place to go back to, but I feel like I might have been a bit too tired from either or. Ah yes. They were making tea. A cricket was having a competition with the teapot. Some loving moments, and then things went a bit darker. And then there was someone in the cart, I think. I don't know. Let's see. Let's start. Where would be a good place to start? Let's start here. How many more cups of tea shall I drink tonight at one sitting than Gruff and Tackleton ever took in 4, I wondered, replied John, good-humouredly as he drew a chair to the round table and began at the cold ham. As to eating, I eat but little, but that little I enjoy, Dot. Even this, his usual sentiment at meal-times, one of his most innocent delusions, for his appetite was always obstinate, and flatly contradicted him. It awoke no smile in the face of his little wife, who stood among the parcels, pushing the cake-box slowly from her with her foot, and never once looked. though her eyes were cast down too, upon the dainty shoe she generally was so mindful of. Absorbed in thought, she stood there, heedless alike of the tea and John, although he called to her and rapped the table with his knife to startle her, until he rose and touched her on the arm. When she looked at him for a moment, and buried to her place behind the tea-board, laughing at her negligence, but not as she had laughed before. The manner and the music were quite changed. The cricket, too, had stopped. Somehow the room was not so cheerful as it had been. Nothing like it. "So these are the parcels, are they, John?" she said, breaking a long silence, which the honest carrier had devoted to the practical illustration of one part of his favorite sentiment. Certainly enjoying what he ate, if it couldn't be admitted that he ate but little. "So these are the parcels, are they, John?" "That's all," said John. "Why, no, laying down his knife and fork and taking a long breath. "I declare I've forgotten the old gentleman." "The old gentleman?" "In the cart," said John. "He was asleep among the straw, the moment I saw him. I've very nearly remembered him twice since I came in, but he went out of my head again." "Halloa! Yahib there! Rouse up! That's my hearty." John said these latter words outside the door, whither he had hurried with the candle in his hand. Miss Slowboy, conscious of some mysterious reference to the old gentleman, and connecting in her mystified imagination certain associations of a religious nature with the phrase, was so disturbed that, hastily rising from the low chair by the fire to seek protection near the skirts of her mistress, and coming into contact as she crossed the doorway with an ancient stranger, she instinctively made a charge or butt at him with the only offensive instrument within her reach. This instrument happening to be the baby. Great commotion and alarm ensued, which the sagacity of Boxer rather tended to increase. For that good dog, more thoughtful than its master, had, it seems, been watching the old gentleman in his sleep, lest he should walk off with a few young poplar trees that were tied up behind the cart. And he still attended to him very closely, worrying his gaiter, in fact, and making dead sets at the buttons. "You're such an undeniable good sleeper, sir," said John, when tranquillity was restored. In the meantime, the old gentleman had stood bareheaded and motionless in the center of the room. "That I have half a mind to ask you where the other 6 are. Only that would be a joke, and I know I should spoil it. Very near, though," murmured the carrier with a chuckle. "Very near." The stranger, who had long white hair, good features, singularly bold and well defined, for an old man, at least, and dark, bright, penetrating eyes, looked round with a smile and saluted the carrier's wife by gravely inclining his head. His garb was quaint and odd, a long, long way behind the time. Its hue was brown all over. In his hand he held a great brown club or walking stick, and striking this upon the floor, it fell asunder, and became a chair, on which he sat down quite composedly. "There," said the courier, turning to his wife, "that's the way I found him, sitting by the roadside, upright as a milestone, and almost as deaf. Sitting in the open air, John. In the open air, replied the carrier. Just at dusk. Carriage paid, he said, and gave me 18 pence. Then he got in, and there he is. He's going, John, I think. Not at all. He was only going to speak. If you please, I was to be left till called for, said the stranger mildly. Don't mind me. With that, he took a pair of spectacles from one of his large pockets and a book from another, and leisurely began to read, making no more of Boxer than if he had been a house lamb. The carrier and his wife exchanged a look of perplexity. The stranger raised his head, and glancing from the latter to the former, said, Your daughter, my good friend? Wife, returned John. Niece, said the stranger. Wife, roared John. Indeed, observed the stranger. Surely. Very young. He quietly turned over and resumed his reading. But before he could have read 2 lines, he again interrupted himself to say, Baby yours? John gave him a gigantic nod, equivalent to an answer in the affirmative delivered through a speaking trumpet. Girl? Boy, roared John. Also very young, eh? Mrs. Peerybingle instantly struck in. 2 months and 3 days. Vaccinated just 6 weeks ago. Took very finely. Considered by the doctor a remarkably beautiful child. Equal to the general run of children at 5 months old. Takes notice in a way quite wonderful. May seem impossible to you, but feel his legs, but feels his legs already. Here the breathless little mother, who had been shrieking these short sentences into the old man's ear, until her pretty face was crimsoned, held up the baby before him as a stubborn and triumphant fact, while Tilly Slowboy, with a melodious cry of "Catcher, catcher," which sounded like some unknown words adapted to a popular sneeze. Yeah. Apologies. Some elves came and gave me a gift. Oh, Santa, you and your very merry Christmas berries. Where was I? Oh, yes, somewhere around here. Now, let's try to find it. Beppy, I need your assistance. All right. Start back up from the top, right there. Thank you, Beppy. Here the breathless little mother, who had been shrieking these short sentences into the old man's ear until her pretty face was crimsoned, held up the baby before him as a stubborn and triumphant fact, while Tilly Slowboy, with a melodious cry of "Catcher, catcher," which sounded like some unknown words adapted to a popular sneeze, performed some cow-like gambols round that all-unconscious innocent. Hark! He's called for sure enough. Hark! He's called for, sure enough, said John, There's somebody at the door. Open it, Tilly. Tilly! Open it! Before she could reach it, however, it was opened from without, being a primitive sort of door, with a latch that anyone could lift if he chose. And a good many people did chose, for all kinds of neighbors liked to have a cheerful word or two with the carrier, though he was no great talker himself. Mood. Being opened, it gave admission to a little, meagre, thoughtful, dingy-faced man, who seemed to have made himself a great coat from the sackcloth covering of some old box. For when he turned to shut the door, and kept the weather out, he disclosed upon the back of that garment the inscription G and T in large black capitals. Also the words glass in bold characters. Good evening, John, said the little man. Good evening, Mum. Good evening, Tilly. Good evening, unbeknown. How's baby, Mum? Boxer's pretty well, I hope. All thriving, Caleb, replied Dot. I'm sure you need only look at the dear child for one to know that. And I'm sure I need only look at you for another, said Caleb. He didn't look at her, though. He had a wandering and thoughtful eye, which seemed to be always projecting itself into some other time and place, no matter what he said. A description which will equally apply to his voice. All right for another, said Caleb, or at Tilly as far as that goes, or certainly at Boxer. Busy just now, Caleb? Asked the carrier. Why, pretty well, John, he returned with the distraught air of a man who is casting about for the philosopher's stone, at least. Pretty much so. There's rather a run on Noah's Ark at present. I could have wished to improve upon the family, but I don't see how it's to be done at the price. It would be a satisfaction to one's mind to make it clearer which was Shems and Hams, and which was wives. Flies ain't on that scale neither, as compared with elephants, you know. Well, have you got anything in the parcel line for me, John? The carrier put his hand into a pocket on the coat he had taken off, and brought out, carefully preserved in moss and paper, a tiny flower pot. There it is, he said, adjusting it with great care. Not so much as a leaf damaged. Not so much as a leaf damaged. Full of buds. Caleb's dull eye brightened as he took it, and thanked him. Dear Caleb, said the carrier, very dear this season. Never mind that. It would be cheap to me, whatever it costs, returned the little man. Anything else, John? A small box, replied the carrier. Here you are. Here you are. For Caleb Plummer, said the little man, spelling out the direction. With cash, John. I don't think it's for me. With care, returned the carrier, looking over his shoulder. Where do you make out cash? Oh, to be sure, said Caleb. It's all right, with care. Yes, that's mine. It might have been with cash, indeed, if my dear boy in the golden South Americas had lived, John. You loved him like a son, didn't you? You didn't say you did. I know, of course. Caleb Plummer, with care. Yes, it's all right. It's a box of dolls' eyes for my daughter's work. I wish it was her own sight in a box, John. I wish it was, or could be, cried the carrier. Thank you, said the little man. Or is it more? Thank ye. You speak very hearty. To think that she should never see the dolls, and them a-stirring at her so bold all day long. That's where it cuts. What's the damage, John? I'll damage you, said John, if you inquire. Dot, very near. Well, it's like you say so, observed the little man. It's your kind way. Let me see if that's... I think that's all. I think not, said the carrier. Try again. Something for our governor, eh? said Caleb, after pondering a little while. To be sure, that's what I came for, but my head's so running on them marks and things. He hasn't been here, has he? Not he, returned the carrier. He's too busy courting. He's coming round, though, said Caleb, for he told me to keep on the near side of the road going home, and it was 10 to 1 he'd take me up. I had better go, but by the by, you couldn't have the goodness to let me pinch Box's tail, Mum, for half a moment, could you? Why, Caleb, what a question! Oh, never mind, Mum, said the little man. He mightn't like it, perhaps. There's a small order just come in for barking dogs, and I should wish to go as close to nature as I could, for 6 pence. That's all. Never mind, Mum. It happened opportunely that Boxer, without receiving the proposed stimulus, began to bark with great zeal. But as this implied the approach of some new visitor, Caleb, postponing his study from the life to a more convenient season, shouldered the round box and took a hurried leave. He might have spared himself the trouble, for he met the visitor upon the threshold. Oh, you are here, are you? Wait a bit. I'll take you home. John Peerybingle, my service to you. More of my service to your pretty wife. Handsomer every day. Better, too, if possible, and younger, mused the speaker in a low voice. That's the devil of it. I should be astonished at your paying compliments, Mr. Tackleton, said Dot, not with the best grace in the world, but for your conditions. You know about it, then? I have got myself to believe it somehow, said Dot. After a hard struggle, I suppose. Very. Tackleton the toy merchant. Pretty generally known as Gruff and Tackleton, for that was the firm, though Gruff had been bought out long ago, only leaving his name. And, as some said, his nature, according to its dictionary meaning in the business, Tackleton the toy merchant was a man whose vocation had been quite misunderstood by his parents and guardians. If they had made him a moneylender, or a sharp attorney, or a sheriff's officer, or a broker, he might have sown his discontent oats in his youth, and after having had the full run of himself in ill-natured transactions, might have turned out amiable at last for the sake of a little freshness and novelty. But cramped and chafing in the peaceable pursuit of toy-making, he was a domestic ogre, who had been living on children all his life, and was their implacable enemy. He despised all toys, wouldn't have bought one for the world, delighted in his malice to insinuate grim expression into the faces of brown paper farmers who drove pigs to market, bellmen who advertised lost lawyers' consciences, movable old ladies who darned stockings or carved pies, and other like samples of his stock in trade. In appalling masks, hideous, hairy, red-eyed jacks and boxes. in appalling masks, hideous, hairy, red-eyed jacks in boxes, vampire kites, demoniacal tumblers who wouldn't lie down, and were perpetually flying forward to stare infants out of countenance. His soul perfectly revelled. They were his only relief and safety valve. He was great in such inventions. Anything suggestive of a pony nightmare was delicious to him. He had even lost money, and he took to that toy very kindly, by getting up goblins' slides for magic lanterns, whereon the powers of darkness were depicted as sort of supernatural shellfish with human faces. In intensifying the portraitures of giants, he had sunk quite a little capital, and though no painter himself, he could indicate for the instruction of his artists, with a piece of chalk, a certain furtive leer for the countenance of those monsters, which was safe to destroy the peace of mind of any young gentleman between the ages of 6 and 11, for the whole Christmas of midsummer vacation. What he was in toys, he was, as most men are, in other things. You may easily suppose, therefore, that within the great green cape, which reached down to the calves of his legs, there was buttoned up to the chin an uncommonly pleasant fellow, and that he was about as choice a spirit and as agreeable a companion as ever stood in a pair of bull-headed-looking boots with mahogany-colored tops. Still, Tackleton the toy merchant was going to be married. In spite of all this, he was going to be married, and to a young wife, too. A beautiful young wife. He didn't look like much of a bridegroom as he stood in the carrier's kitchen, with a twist in his dry face and a screw in his body, and his hat jerked over the bridge of his nose, and his hands tucked down into the bottom of his pockets, and his whole sarcastic, ill-conditioned self peering out of one little corner of one little eye like the concentrated essence of any number of ravens. But a bridegroom he designed to be. In 3 days' time, next Thursday, the last day of the first month in the year, that's my wedding day, said Tackleton. Did I mention that he had always one eye... Did I mention that he had always one eye wide open, and one eye nearly shut, and that the only eye nearly shut was always the expressive eye? I don't think I did. That's my wedding day, said Tackleton, rattling his money. Why, it's our wedding day, too, exclaimed the carrier. Laughed Tackleton. Odd. You're just such another couple. Just. The indignation of Dot at this presumptuous assertion is not to be described. Oh, Merry Christmas, Jack. Oh, thank you, Simon. Hope you are having a lovely holiday as well. Where was I? Beppy, where was I? Right. Let's start from back there. Thank you, Beppy. It is not cosplay. Laughed Tackleton. Odd, you're just another couple. Just. The indignation of Dot at this presumptuous assertion is not to be described. What next? His imagination would compass the possibility of just such another baby, perhaps. The man was mad. "I say, a word with you," murmured Tackleton, nudging the carrier with his elbow and taking him a little apart. "You'll come to the wedding. We're in the same boat, you know." "How in the same boat?" inquired the carrier. "A little disparity, you know, with Tackleton," said Tackleton with another nudge. "Come and spend an evening with us beforehand." "Why?" demanded John, astonished at this pressing hospitality. "Why?" returned the other. "There's a new way of receiving an invitation. Why, for pleasure, sociability, you know, and all that." "Sociability, you know, and all that." "I thought you were never sociable," said John in his plain way. "Pshaw! It's of no use to be anything but free with you, I see," said Tackleton. "Why, then, the truth is you have what tea-drinking people call a sort of a comfortable appearance together, you and your wife. You know better, you know, but—" "No, we don't know better," interposed John. "What are you talking about?" "Well, we don't know better, then," said Tackleton. "We'll agree that we don't. As you like. What does it matter? I was going to say, as you have that sort of appearance, your company will produce a favorable effect on Mrs. Tackleton. That will be. And though I don't think your good lady very friendly to me in this matter, still she can't help herself from falling into my views, for there's a compactness and coziness of appearance about her that always tells, even in an indifferent case. You'll say you'll come?" "We have arranged to keep our wedding day, as far as that goes, at home," said John. "We have made the promise to ourselves these 6 months. We think you see that home." "Bah! What home?" cried Tackleton. "4 walls and a ceiling. Why don't you kill that cricket? I would. I always do. I hate that noise. There are 4 walls and a ceiling at my house. Come to me." "You kill your crickets, eh?" said John. "Oh, so this was it. Okay, I thought it was the reader." "Bah, what's home?" cried Tackleton. 4 walls and a ceiling. Why don't you kill that cricket? I would. I always do. I hate their noise. There are 4 walls and a ceiling at my house. Come to me." "You kill your crickets, eh?" said John. He must have noticed the look. "Scrunch 'em, sir," returned the other, setting his heel heavily on the floor. "You'll say you'll come? It's as much your interest as mine. You know, that the women should persuade each other that they're quiet and contented, and couldn't be better off. I know their way. Whatever one woman says, another woman is determined to clinch. Always. There's that spirit of emulation among 'em. Sir, that if your wife says to my wife, 'I am the happiest woman in the world, and mine's the best husband in the world,' and I dote on him, my wife will say the same to yours, or more and half, believe me." "Do you mean to say she don't then?" asked the courier. "Don't?" cried the Tackleton with a short, sharp laugh. "Don't what?" The carrier had some faint idea of adding, "dote upon you," but happening to meet the half-closed eye as it twinkled upon him over the turned-up collar of the cape, which was within an ace of poking it out, he felt it such an unlikely part and parcel of anything to be dotted on, that he substituted, "that she don't believe it." "Oh, you dog, you're joking," said Tackleton. But the carrier, though slow to understand the full drift of his meaning, eyed him in such a serious manner that he was obliged to be a little more exploratory. "I have the humor," said Tackleton, holding up his finger on his left hand and tapping the forefinger to imply. "There I am, Tackleton to wit. I have the humor, sir, to marry a young wife and a pretty wife." Here he rapped his little finger to express the bride, not sparingly, but sharply, with a sense of power. "I'm able to gratify that humor, and I do. It's my whim. But now look there." He pointed to where Dot was sitting, thoughtfully, before the fire, leaning her dimpled chin upon her hand, and watching the bright blaze. The carrier looked at her, and then at him, and then at her, and then at him again. "She honors and obeys, no doubt, you know," said Tackleton, "and that, as I am not a man of sentiment, is quite enough for me. But do you think there's anything more in it?" "I think," observed the carrier, "that I should chuck any man out of a window who said there wasn't." "Exactly so," returned the other with an unusual alacrity of assent. "To be sure, doubtless you would. Of course, I am certain of it. Good night. Pleasant dreams." The carrier was puzzled and made uncomfortable and uncertain in spite of himself. He couldn't help showing it in his manner. I cannot follow the story whatsoever. Is this even English? Yes. Very much so English. In fact, it's classic English. So basically, his dudes are talking. He's inviting him to his house. He's like, "Hey, yo, can you, come over here? It will look pretty good because you're, well-known and well-liked, bro." And dude is like, "Why?" And he's like, "Please, I need you. I need help. I'm begging you. My company, oh man, it might go down. My wife, oh boy, I don't know, man. I'm a little worried that she's not feeling it, with me." And the other dude's like, okay. And the other dude's like, "Well, she's a whammon. She obey. Is there anything more you need?" And the guy's like, "Yeah." "Is it really old?" "Yes, very old." Look it up. Look how old this thing is. Actually, a good recap. Thanks. Where was I? Beppe! Where was I? All right. Thank you, Beppe. Scratch on my nose. The carrier was puzzled and made uncomfortable and uncertain, in spite of himself. He couldn't help showing it in his manner. "Good night, my dear friend," said Tackleton compassionately. "I'm off. We're exactly alike in reality, I see. You won't give us tomorrow evening?" "Well, Next day you go out visiting, I know. I'll meet you there, and bring my wife that is to be. I'll do her good. You're agreeable? Thank ye. What's that? What the hell? It was a very loud cry from the carrier's wife, a loud, sharp, sudden cry that made the room ring like a glass vessel. She has risen from her seat and stood like one transfixed by terror and surprise. The stranger had advanced towards the fire to warm himself, and stood within a short stride of a chair, but quite still. "Dot!" cried the carrier. "Mary, darling, what's the matter?" They were all about her in a moment. Caleb, who had been dozing on the cake box in the first imperfect recovery of his suspended presence of mind, seized Miss Slowboy by the hair of her head, but immediately apologized. Ticklish caterpillar. "Mary," exclaimed the carrier, supporting her in his arms, "are you ill? What is it? Tell, my dear." She only answered by beating her hands together and falling into a wild fit of laughter. Then, sinking from his grasp upon the ground, she covered her face with her apron and wept bitterly. And then she laughed again, and she cried again. And then she said how cold it was, and suffered him to lead her to the fire, where she sat down as before, the old man standing as before, quite still. "I'm better, John," she said. "I'm quite well now. John." But John was on the other side of her. Why turn her face towards the strange old gentleman, as if addressing him? Was her brain wandering? Boo! Merry Christmas. Ayo, Toxic Key. Thank you for stopping by. Hello. Sorry for the late response. Hope you've been doing good. Hope you've been having good holiday. Hope everyone in the family is doing well. I'm reading right now. Hello. He's reading like a smart kid. And you're replying like a smart ass kid. Where was I? Peppy. Where was I? Oh yeah. She was acting like crazy. Thank you, Peppy. All I say is a yuck. Continue. Okay. Let's see. "I'm better, John," she said. "I'm quite well now. John!" But John was on the other side of her. Why turn her face towards the strange old man, as if addressing him? Was her brain wandering? "Only a fancy, John dear. A kind of shock. A something coming suddenly before my eyes. I don't know what it was. It's quite gone. Quite gone." "Well, I'm glad it's gone," muttered Tackleton, turning the expressive eye all around the room. "I wonder where it's gone and what it was. Caleb, come here. Who's that with the gray hair?" "I don't know, sir," returned Caleb in a whisper. "Never seen him before, in all my life." A beautiful figure for a nutcracker, quite a new model, with a screw jaw opening down into his waistcoat. He'd be lovely. His motherfucking Joe Biden. Oh boy. With a screw jaw opening down into his waistcoat, he'd be lovely. Not ugly enough, said Tackleton. Or for a firebox either, observed Caleb in a deep contemplation. What a model! Unscrew his head to put the matches in, turn his heels upwards for the light, and what a firebox for a gentleman's mantel shelf, just as he stands. Not half ugly enough, said Tackleton. Nothing in him at all. Come, bring that box. All right now, I hope. Oh, quite gone, said the little woman, waving him hurriedly away. Good night. Good night, said Tackleton. Good night, John Peerybingle. Take care how you carry that box, Caleb. Let it fall, and I'll murder you. Dark as pitch and weather worse than ever, eh? Good night. So with another sharp look round the room, he went out at the door, followed by Caleb with the wedding cake on his head. The carrier had been so much astounded by his little wife, and so busily engaged in soothing and tending her, that he had scarcely been conscious of the stranger's presence until now, when he again stood there, their only guest. He doesn't belong to them, you see, said John. I must give him a hint to go. I beg your pardon, old friend. I beg your pardon, friend, said the old gentleman, advancing to him. The more so as I fear your wife has not been well, but the attendant whom my infirmity. He touched his ears and shook his head. Renders almost indispensable not having arrived. I fear there must be some mistake. The bad night which made the shelter of your comfortable cart, may I never have a worse, so acceptable, is still as bad as ever. Would you, in your kindness, suffer me to rent a room, a bed here? Yes, yes, cried Dot. Yes, certainly. Oh, said the carrier, surprised by the rapidity of this consent. Well, I don't object, but still, I'm not quite sure that— Hush, she interrupted. Dear John. Why, he's stone deaf, urged John. I know he is, but— Yes, sir, certainly. Yes, certainly. I'll make him up a bed directly, John. As she hurried off to do it, the flutter of her spirits and the agitation of her manner were so strange that the carrier stood looking after her, quite confounded. Did its mothers make it up a beds, then? Cried Mrs. Slowboy to the baby. And did its hair grow brown and curly when its caps was lifted off, and frighten it, a precious pest, a-sitting by the fire? My moustache, stop falling, please. With that uncountable attraction of the mind to trifles, which is often incidental to a state of doubt and confusion, the carrier, as he walked slowly to and fro, found himself mentally repeating even these absurd words many times. So many times that he got them by heart, and was still conning them over and over, like a lesson, when Tilly, after administering as much friction to the little bald head with her hand as she thought wholesome, according to the practice of nurses, had once more tied the baby's cap on. And frighten it, a precious pest, a-sitting by the fires. What frightened Dot, I wonder? Mused the carrier, pacing to and fro. He scouted from his heart the insinuations of the toy merchant, and yet they filled him with a vague and indefinite uneasiness. For Tackleton was quick and sly, and he had the painful sense himself of being of slow perception, that a broken hint was always worrying to him. He certainly had no intention in his mind of linking anything that Tackleton had said with the unusual conduct of his wife. But the two subjects of reflection came into his mind together, and he could not keep them asunder. The bed was soon made ready, and the visitor, declining all refreshments but a cup of tea, retired. Then Dot, quite well again, said, quite well again, arranged the great chair in the chimney corner for her husband, filled his pipe, and gave it to him, and took her usual little stool beside him on the hearth. She always would sit on that little stool. I think she must have had kind of a notion that it was a coaxing, wheedling little stool. She was out and out, the very best filler of a pipe, I should say, in the 4 quarters of the globe. To see her put that chubby little finger in the bowl, and then blow down the pipe to clear the tube, and when she had done so, affect to think that there was really something in the tube, and blow a dozen times, and hold it to her eye, like a telescope with a most provoking twist in her capital little face, as she looked down it, was quite a brilliant thing. As to the tobacco, she was a perfect mistress of the subject, and her lighting of the pipe with a wisp of paper when the carrier had it in his mouth, going so very near his nose, and yet not scorching it. It was art, high art, sir. And the cricket and the kettle, turning up again, acknowledged it. The bright fire, blazing up again, acknowledged it. The little mower on the clock, in his unheeded work, acknowledged it. The carrier, in his soothing forehead and expanding face, acknowledged it the readiest of all. And as he soberly and thoughtfully puffed at his old pipe, and as the Dutch clock ticked, and as the fire red gleamed, and as the cricket chirped, that genius of his hearth and home, for such the cricket was, came out in fiery shape into the room, and summoned many forms of home about him. Dots of all ages and all sizes filled the chamber. Dots who were merry children, running on before him, gathering flowers in the fields. Coy Dots, half shrinking, half yielding, to the pleading of his own rough image. Newly married Dots, alighting at the door, and taking wandering possession of the household keys. Motherly little Dots, attended by fictitious slow-boys, bearing babies to be christened, matronly Dots. Matronly Dots, still young and blooming, watching dots of daughters as they danced as rustic bulls, fat Dots encircled and beset by troops of rosy grandchildren, withered Dots who leaned on sticks and tottered as they crept along. Old carriers, too, appeared, with blind old boxes lying at their feet, and newer carts with younger drivers. Perry-Bingle brothers on the tilt, and sick old carriers tended by the gentlest hands and gravest of dead and gone old carriers. Green in the churchyard. And as the cricket showed him all these things, he saw them plainly, though his eyes were fixed upon the fire. Dutch reference? What's a Dutch reference? The carrier's heart grew light and happy, and he thanked his household gods with all his might, and cared no more for Gruff and Tackleton than you do. But what was that young figure of a man, which the same fiery cricket sat so near her stool, and which remained there, singly and alone? There's a Dutch clock. Why did it linger still, so near her, with its arm upon the chimney-piece, ever repeating, "Married, and not to me"? Oh, Dot, oh, failing Dot, there is no place for it in all your husband's visions. Why has its shadow fallen on his hearth? Caleb Plummer and his blind daughter lived all alone by themselves. Chirp the second. As the storybooks say, as my blessing, with yours to back it, I hope, on the storybooks for saying anything in this workaday world. Caleb Plummer and his blind daughter lived all alone by themselves, in a little cracked nutshell of a wooden house, which was, in truth, no better than a pimple on the prominent red brick nose of Gruff and Tackleton. Oh, so now we're going to another cricket who's on these other fellows' fireplaces. By the way, I don't think I'm buying anyone. I guess you don't have to buy me a game. Don't buy me a game. I'm good. I have a lot of games. A whole lot. I don't need to worry about that yet. It's going to be a good while before I run out of games. The premises of Gruff and Tackleton were the great feature of the street, but you might have knocked down Caleb Plummer's dwelling with a hammer or two, and carried off the pieces in a cart. If any one had done the dwelling house of Caleb Plummer the honor to miss it after such an brain. If anyone had done the dwelling house of Caleb Plummer the honor to miss it after such an inroad, it would have been, no doubt, to commend its demolition as a vast improvement. It stuck to the premises of Gruff and Tackleton like a barnacle to a ship's keel, or a snail to a door, or a little bunch of toadstools to the stem of a tree. But it was the germ from which the full-grown trunk of Gruff and Tackleton had sprung, and under its cozy roof. The Gruff before last had, in a small way, made toys for a generation of old boys and girls who had played with them and found them out and broken them and gone to sleep. I have said that Caleb and his poor blind daughter lived there, but I should have said that Caleb lived there, and his poor blind daughter somewhere else, in an enchanted home of Caleb's furnishing, where scarcity and shabbiness were not, and troubled never enter. Caleb was no sorcerer, but in the only magical art that still remains to us, the magic of devoted, deathless love, Nature had been the mistress of his study, and from her teaching all the wonder came. I'm mentally unsafe. If you still want Stardew Valley, I can recommend it. 70 hours a game. Word, I'm mentally insane. Jesus Christ. You don't need to get me any games. I'm good. I'll have like a shit ton. Please. I have too many to get to. Where was I? Ah, right. The blind girl never knew that ceilings were discolored, walls blotched and bare of plaster here and there, high crevices unstopped and widening every day, beams mouldering and tending downward. The blind girl never knew that iron was rusting, wood rotting, paper peeling off, the size and shape and true proportions of the dwelling withering away. The blind girl never knew that ugly shapes of of delf and earthenware were on the board. That sorrow and faint-heartedness were in the house. That Caleb's scanty hairs were turning grayer and more grayer before her sight, before her sightless face. The blind girl never knew they had a master, cold, exacting, and uninterested. Never knew that Tackleton was Tackleton, in short, but lived in the belief of an eccentric humorist who loved to have his jest with them, and while he was the guardian angel of their lives, disdained to hear one word of thankfulness. Oh my God. Simon coupon for Christmas. And all was Caleb's doing, all the doing, of a simple father. But he too had a cricket on his hearth, and listening sadly to its music when the motherless blind child was very young. That spirit had inspired him with the thought that even her great deprivation might be almost changed into a blessing, and the girl made happy by these little means. Mwah! Pesky caterpillar. For all the cricket tribe are potent spirits, even though the people who hold converse with them do not know it, which is frequently the case. And there are not, in the unseen world, voices more gentle and more true than may be so implicitly relied on, or that are so certain to give none but tenderest counsel, as the voices in which the spirits of the fireside and the hearth address themselves to humankind. Caleb and his daughter were at work, together in their unusual working room, which served them for their ordinary living room as well. And a strange place it was. There was houses in it, finished and unfinished, for dolls of all stations in life. Suburban tenements for dolls of moderate means, kitchens and single apartments for dolls of the lower classes, capital town residences for dolls of high estate. Some of these establishments were already furnished, according to estimate, with a view to the convenience of dolls of limited income. Others could be fitted on the most expensive scale, at a moment's notice, from whole shelves of chairs and tables, sofas, bedsteads, and upholstery. The nobility and gentry and public in general, for whose accommodation these tenements were designed, lay here and there in baskets, staring straight up at the ceiling. But in denoting their degrees in society and confining them to their respective stations, which experience shows to be lamentably difficult in real life, the makers of these dolls had far improved on nature, who is often forward and perverse, for they, not resetting on such arbitrary marks of satin, cotton print, and bits of rag, had superadded striking personal differences, which allowed of no mistake. Thus the doll lady of distinction had wax limbs of perfect symmetry, but only she and her compeers, the next grade in the social scale being made of leather, and the next, of course, linen stuff. As to the common people, they had just so many matches out of tinder boxes for their arms and legs, and there they were, established in their sphere at once, beyond the possibility of getting out of it. There were various other samples of his handicraft besides dolls in Caleb Plummer's room. There were Noah's Arks, in which the birds and beasts were an uncommonly tight fit, I assure you. though they could be crammed in, anyhow, at the roof and rattled and shaken into the smallest compass by a bold poetical license. Most of these Noah's Arks had knockers on the doors, inconsistent appendages, perhaps as suggestive of morning callers and a postman, yet a pleasant finish to the outside of the building. There were scores of melancholy little carts which, when the wheels went round, performed most doleful music. Many small fiddles, drums, and other instruments of torture, no end of cannon, shields, swords, spears, and guns. There were little tumblers in red breeches, incessantly swarming up high obstacles of red tape and coming down head first on the other side. And there were innumerable old gentlemen of respectable, not to say venerable, appearance, insanely flying over horizontal pegs, inserted for the purpose in their own street doors. There were beasts of all sorts, horses in particular, of every breed, from the spotted barrel on 4 pegs, with a small tippet for a mane, though the thoroughbred rocker on his highest mettle, as it would have been hard to count the dozens upon dozens of grotesque figures that were ever ready to commit all sorts of absurdities on the turning of a handle. So it would have been no easy task to mention any human folly, vice, or weakness that had not its type, immediate or remote, in Caleb Plummer's room, and not in an exaggerated form, for every little handles will move men and women to a strange performance, as any toy was ever made to undertake. In the midst of all these objects, Caleb and his daughter sat at work. The blind girl busy as a doll's dressmaker, Caleb printing and glazing the 4-pair front of a desirable family mansion. The care imprinted in the lines of Caleb's face, and his absorbed and dreamy manner, which would have sat well on some alchemist or abstruse student, were at first sight an odd contrast to his occupation, and the trivialities about him. But trivial things invented and pursued for bread become very serious matters of fact, and apart from this consideration, I am not at all prepared to say myself that if Caleb had been a Lord Chamberlain, or a Member of Parliament, or a lawyer, or even a great speculator, he would have dealt in toys one whit less whimsical, while I have a very great doubt whether they would have been as harmless. So you were out in the rain last night, father, in your beautiful new great coat? Said Caleb's daughter. In my beautiful new great coat, answered Caleb, glancing towards a clothesline in the room, on which the sackcloth garment previously described was carefully hung to dry. How glad I am you bought it, father. And of such a tailor, too, said Caleb. Quite a fashionable tailor. It's too good for me. The blind girl rested from her work and laughed with delight. Too good, father? What can be too good for you? I'm half ashamed to wear it, though, said Caleb, watching the effect of what he said upon her brightened face. Upon my word, when I hear the boys and people say behind me, Halloa! Here's a swell! I don't know which way to look. And when the beggar wouldn't go away last night, when I said I was very common man, he said, No, your honour, bless your honour, don't say that. I was quite ashamed. I really felt as if I hadn't a right word to wear it. Happy blind girl. How merry she was in her exultation. I see you, father, she said, clasping her hands, as plainly as if I had the eyes. I never want when you are with me. A blue coat. Bright blue, said Caleb. Yes, yes, bright blue, exclaimed the girl, turning up her radiant face. The color I can just remember in the blessed sky. You told me it was blue before. A bright blue coat. Made loose to the figure, suggested Caleb. Yes, loose to the figure, cried the blind girl, laughing heartily. And in it, you, dear father, with your merry eye, your smiling face, your free step, and your dark hair, looking so young and handsome. Halloa, halloa, said Caleb. I shall be vain presently. I don't know how to say that word. Jack, I'm going to eat breakfast. I'll be gone for a while. Okie dokie, Simmons. Have a good lunch, you. I'll probably be here for a while. There's still quite a few pages to read. I think you are already, cried the blind girl, pointing at him in a glee. I know you, father. I've found you out, you see. How different the picture in her mind from Caleb as he sat observing her. She had spoke of his free step. She was right in that. For years and years he had never once crossed that threshold at his own slow pace, but with a footfall counterfeited for her ear. And never had he, when his heart was heaviest, forgotten the light tread that was to render hers so cheerful and courageous. Heaven knows, but I think Caleb's vague bewilderness of manner may have half originated in his having confused himself about himself, and everything around him, for the love of his blind daughter. How could the little man be otherwise than bewildered, after laboring for so many years to destroy his own identity, and that of all objects that had any bearing on it? There we are, said Caleb, falling back a pace or two to form the better judgment of his work. As near the real thing as sixpenn'orth or halfpence is to sixpence. What a pity that the whole front of the house opens at once, if there was only a staircase in it, now, and regular doors to the rooms to go in at. But that's the worst of my calling. I'm always deluding myself, and swindling myself. You're speaking quite softly. You are not tired, father? Tired? Echoed Caleb, with a great burst of animation. What should tire of me? Bertha! What should tire of me, Bertha? I was never tired. What does it mean? To give the greater force of his words, he checked himself in an involuntary imitation of two half-length stretching and yawning figures on the mantel shelf, who were represented as in one eternal state of weariness from the waist upwards, and hummed a fragment of a song. It was Bacchanalian. I don't know how to say that. Not sure how to read that word. Something about a sparkling bowl, and he sang it with an assumption of a devil-may-care voice that made his face 1,000 times more meagre and more thoughtful than ever. What? You're singing, are you? Said Tackleton, putting his head in at the door. Go it! I can't sing. Nobody would have suspected him of it. He hadn't what is generally termed a singing face by any means. I can't afford to sing, said Tackleton. I'm glad you can. I hope you can afford to work, too. Hardly time for both, I should think. If only you... if you only could see him. If you could only see him, Bertha, how he's winking at me, whispered Caleb. Such a man to joke. You think, if you didn't know him, he was in earnest, wouldn't you now? The blind girl smiled and nodded. The bird that can sing and won't sing must be made to sing, they say, grumbled Tackleton. What about the owl that can't sing, and oughtn't, and oughtn't to sing, and will sing? Is there anything that he should be made to do? The extent to which he's winking at this moment, whispered Caleb to his daughter. Oh, my gracious! Always merry and light-hearted with us, cried the smiling Bertha. Oh, you're there, are you? Answered Tackleton. Poor idiot. He really did believe she was an idiot. And he founded the belief, I can't say, whether consciously or not, upon her being fond of him. Well, and being here, and being there, how are you? Said Tackleton on his grudging way. Oh, well, quite well, and as happy as ever as you can wish me to be. And as happy as even you can wish me to be. As happy as you would make the whole world if you could. Poor idiot, muttered Tackleton. No gleam of reason, not a gleam. The blind girl took his hand and kissed it, held it for a moment in her own hands, and laid her cheek against it tenderly before releasing it. There was such unspeakable affection and such fervent gratitude in the act, that Tackleton himself was moved to say, in a milder growl than usual, What's the matter now? I stood it close beside my pillow, and I went to sleep last night, and remembered it in my dreams. And when the day broke, the glorious red sun. The red sun, father? Red in the mornings and the evenings, Bertha, said poor Caleb, with a woeful glance at his employer. When it rose, and the bright light, I almost feared to strike myself against the walking, come into the room, I turned the little tree toward it, and blessed heaven for making things so precious, and blessed you for sending them to cheer me. Bedlam broke loose, said Tackleton under his breath. We shall arrive under the strait waistcoast of mufflers soon. We're getting on. Caleb, with his hands hooked loosely in each other, stared vacantly before him while his daughter spoke, as if he really were uncertain, I believe he was, whether Tackleton had done anything to deserve her thanks or not. If he could have been a perfectly free agent at that moment, required on pain of death to kick the toy merchant or fall at his feet according to his merits, I believe it would have been an even chance which course he could have taken. Yet Caleb knew that within his own hands he had brought the little rose tree home for her, so carefully, and that with his own lips he had forged the innocent deception which should help to keep her from suspecting how very much, he, every day, denied himself, that she might be the happier. Bertha, said Tackleton, assuming for the nonce a little cordiality, come here. Oh, I can come straight to you. You needn't guide me. Ah, she rejoined. Oh, I can come straight to you. You needn't guide me, she rejoined. Shall I tell you a secret, Bertha? If you will, she answered eagerly. How bright the darkened face, how adorned with light, the listening head. This is the day on which little what's-her-name the spoilt child, Peribingle's wife, pays her regular visit to you. Makes her fantastic picnic here, ain't it? But booming outside. There was a firework earlier, but I don't know if it's all fireworks. Anyway. How bright the darkened face, how adorned with light the listening head. This is the day on which little what's-her-name, the spoilt child Peribingle's wife, pays her regular visit to you. Makes her fantastic picnics here, ain't it? Said Tackleton with a strong expression of distaste for the whole concern. Yes, replied Bertha, this is the day. I thought so, said Tackleton. I should like to join the party. Do you hear that, father? Cried the blind girl in an ecstasy. Yes, I heard it, murmured Caleb with the fixed look of a sleepwalker. But I don't believe it. It's one of my lies, I've no doubt. You see, I want to bring the Peribingles a little more into company with my Fieldings, said Tackleton. I'm going to be married by May. Married? Cried the blind girl, starting from him. She's such a confounded idiot, muttered Tackleton, that I was afraid she'd never comprehend me. Ah, Bertha, married. Church parson, clerk, beadle, glass coach, bells, breakfast, bride cake, favours, married bones, cleavers, and all the rest of the tomfoolery. A wedding, you know. A wedding. Don't you know what a wedding is? I know, replied the blind girl in a gentle tone. Oh, I could have read that different. I understand. Do you? Muttered Tackleton. It's more than I expected. Well, on that account, I want to join the party, and to bring May and her mother. I'll send a little something or other before the afternoon, a cold leg of mutton, or some comfortable trifle of that sort. You'll expect me? Yes, she answered. She had dropped her head and turned away, and so stood with her hands crossed, musing. I don't think you will, muttered Tackleton, looking at her, for you seem to have forgotten all about it already, Caleb. Caleb! I may venture to say I'm here, I suppose, thought Caleb. Sir? Take care she don't forget what I've been saying to her. She never forgets, returned Caleb. It's one of the few things she ain't clever in. Every man thinks his own geese swans, observed the toy merchant with a shrug. Poor devil. Having delivered himself of which remark, with infinite contempt, old Gruff and Tackleton withdrew. Bertha remained where he had left her, lost in meditation. The gaiety had vanished from her downcast face, and it was very sad. 3 or 4 times she shook her head, as if bewailing some remembrance or some loss. But her sorrowful reflections found no vent in words. It was not until Caleb had been occupied some time in yoinking a team of horses to a wagon, by the summary process of nailing the harnesses to the vital parts of their bodies, that she drew near to his working stool, and sitting down beside him, said, Father, I am lonely in the dark. I want my eyes, my patient, willing eyes. Here they are, said Caleb, always ready. They are more yours than mine, Bertha, any hour in the 4 and 20. They're more yours than mine, Bertha, any hour in the 4 and 20. What shall your eyes do for you, dear? Look around the room, father. All right, said Caleb. No sooner said than done, Bertha. Tell me about it. It's much the same as usual, said Caleb. Homely, but very snug. The gay colors on the walls, the bright flowers on the plates and dishes, the shining wood where there are beams or panels, the general cheerfulness and neatness of the building make it very pretty. Cheerful and neat it was, whatever Bertha's hands could busy themselves. But nowhere else were cheerfulness and neatness possible, in the old crazy shed which Caleb's fancy so transformed. You have your working dress on, and are not so gallant as when you wear the handsome coat, said Bertha, touching him. Not quite so gallant, answered Caleb. Pretty brisk, though. Father, said the blind girl, drawing close to his side, and stealing one arm round his neck. Tell me something about May. She is very fair? She is indeed, said Caleb. And she was indeed. It was quite a rare thing to Caleb not to have drawn on his invitation. Her hair is dark, said Bertha pensively, darker than mine. Her voice is sweet and musical, I know. I have often loved to hear it. And her shape. There is not a doll in all the room to equal it, said Caleb. And her eyes. He stopped, for Bertha had drawn closer round to his neck, and from the arm that clung about him came a warning pressure which he understood too well. He coughed a moment, hammered for a moment, and then fell back upon the song about the sparkling bowl, his infallible resource in all such difficulties. Our friend, father, our benefactor. I'm never tired, you know, of hearing about him. Now, was I ever? She said hastily. Well, of course not, said Caleb, and with reason. Ah, with how much reason, cried the blind girl with such fervency that Caleb, though his motives were so pure, could not endure to meet her face, but dropped his eyes as if she could have read them in his innocent deceit. Then tell me again about him, dear father, said Bertha. Many times again. His face is benevolent, kind and tender, honest and true. I am sure it is. The manly heart that tries to cloak all favors with a show of roughness and unwillingness beats in its every look and glance, and makes it noble, added Caleb in his quiet desperation. And makes it noble, cried the blind girl. He is older than May, father. Yes, said Caleb reluctantly. He's a little older than May, but that don't signify. Oh, father, yes, to be his patient companion in infirmity and age, to be his gentle nurse in sickness, and his constant friend in suffering and sorrow, to know no weariness in working for his sake, to watch him, tend him, to sit beside his bed and talk to him awake and pray for him asleep. What privileges these would be! What opportunities for proving all her truth and devotion to him! Would she do all this, dear father? No doubt of it, said Caleb. I love her, father. I can love her from my soul, exclaimed the blind girl. And saying so, she laid her poor blind face on Caleb's shoulder, and so wept and wept, that He was almost sorry to have brought the tearful happiness upon her. In the meantime, there had been a pretty sharp commotion at John Perrybingle's, for little Miss Perrybingles naturally couldn't think of going anywhere without the baby. And to get the baby under way took time. Not that there was much of the baby, speaking of it as a thing of weight and measure. But there was a vast deal to do about it. And it all had to be done by easy stages. For instance, when the baby was got by hook and by crook to a certain point of dressing, and you might have rationally supposed that another touch or two would finish him off and turn him out of a tippy-top baby challenging the world, he was unexpectedly extinguished in a flannel cap, and hustled off to bed, where he simmered, so to speak, between two blankets for the best part of an hour. From this state of inaction, when he was recalled, shining very much and roaring violently to partake of, well, there's people outside. Where he simmered, so to speak, between two blankets for the best part of an hour. From this state of inaction, he was then recalled, shining very much and roaring violently to partake of, well, I would rather say, if you'll permit me to speak generally, of a slight repast. After which he went to sleep again. Mrs. Perrybingle took advantage of this interval to make herself as smart in a small way as you ever saw anybody in all your life. And, during the same short truce, Miss Slowboy insinuated herself into a Spencer of a fashion, so surprising and ingenious that it had no connection with herself, or anything else in the universe, but was a shrunken, dog-eared, independent fact, pursuing its lonely course without the least regard to anybody. By this time, the baby, being all alive again, was invested by the united effort of Mrs. Perrybingle and Miss Slowboy, with a cream-colored mantle for its body, and a sort of nankeen raised pie for its head. And so in course of time they all three got down to the door, where the old horse had already taken more than the full value of its day's toll out of the turnpike's trust, by tearing up the road with its impatient autographs, and whence Boxer might be dimly seen in the remote perspective, standing looking back and tempting him to come on without orders. As to a chair, or anything of the kind for helping Mrs. Perrybingle into the cart, you know very little of John, if you think that was necessary. Before, you could have seen him lift her from the ground. There she was, in her place, fresh and rosy, saying, "John, how can you? Think of Tilly." If I might be allowed to mention a young lady's legs on any terms, I would observe of Miss Slowboy's that there was a fatality about them which rendered them singularly liable to be grazed, and that she never effected the smallest descent or descent without recording the circumstance upon them with a notch, as Robinson Crusoe marked the days upon his wooden calendar. But as this night might be considered ungenteel, I'll think of it. John, you've got the basket with the veal and ham pie and things, and the bottles of beer. And the bottles of beer, said Dot. If you haven't, you must return the round again this very minute. You're a nice little article, returned the carrier, to be talking about turning round after keeping me a full quarter of an hour behind my time. I'm sorry for it, John, said Dot in a great bustle, but I really could not think of going to Bertha's. I would not do it, John, on any account, without the veal and ham pie, and things and bottles of beer. Way! I don't know what it means. This monosyllable was addressed to the horse, which didn't mind it at all. "Oh, do way, John," said Mrs. Peerybingle. "Please." "It'll be time enough to do that," returned John, "and I begin to leave things behind me. The basket's here safe enough." "What a hard-hearted monster you must be, John, not to have said so at once, and saved me such a turn." "I declared I wouldn't go to Bertha's without the veal and ham pie and things and the bottle of beer for any money. Regularly once a fortnight ever since we had been married have we made our little picnic there. If anything was to go wrong with it, I should almost think we were never to be lucky again." "It was a kind thought in the first instance," said the carrier, "and I honor you for it, little woman." "My dear John," replied Dot, turning very red, "don't talk about honoring me, good gracious." "By the by," observed the carrier, "that old gentleman," again so visibly and instantly embarrassed. "He's an odd fish," said the carrier, looking straight along the road before them. Oh my, what was that? A random hiccup. "I can't make him out. I don't believe there's any harm in him." "None at all. I'm sure there's none at all." "Yes," said the carrier, with his eyes attracted to her face by the great earnestness of her manner. "I'm glad you feel so certain of it, because it's a confirmation to me. It's curious that he should have taken it into his head to ask leave to go on lodging with us, isn't it? Ain't it? Things come about so strangely." "So strangely," she rejoined in a low voice, scarcely audible. "However, he's a good-natured old gentleman," said John, and pays as a gentleman. And I think his word is to be relied upon like a gentleman's. I had quite a long talk with him this morning. He can hear me better already, he says, as he gets more used to my voice. He told me a great deal about himself, and I told him a great deal about myself, and a rare lot of questions he asked me. I gave him information about my having 2 beats, in my business. One day to the right from our house and back again. Another day to the left from our house and back again, for he's a stranger and I don't know the names of places about here. They seemed quite pleased. "Why, then, I shall be returning home tonight your way," he says, "and I thought you'd be coming in an exact opposite direction." "That's capital. I may trouble you for another lift, perhaps." "But engage not to fall to so sound asleep again." He was sound asleep, surely. "Dot, what are you thinking of?" "Thinking of, John? I was listening to you." "Oh, that's right," said the honest carrier. "I was afraid from the look of your face that I had gone rambling on so long as to set you thinking about something else." "I was very near it, I'll be bound." Dot making no reply, they jogged on, for some little time in silence. But it was not easy to remain silent very long in John Peerybingle's cart, for everybody's on the road had something to say, though it might only be "How are you?" and indeed it was very often nothing else. Still, to give that back again in the right spirit of cordiality required not merely a nod and a smile, but a wholesome an action of the lungs withal, as a long-winded parliamentary speech. Sometimes passengers on foot or horseback plodded on a little ways beside the cart, for the express purpose of having a chat. And then there was a great deal to be said on both sides. Then Boxer gave occasion to more good-natured recognitions of and by the carrier than a dozen Christians could have done. Everybody knew him all along the road, especially the fowls and pigs who, when they saw him approaching, with his body all on one side, and his ears pricked up inquisitively, and that knob of a tail making the most of itself in the air, immediately withdrew into remote back settlements, without waiting for the honor of a nearer acquaintance. He had business everywhere, going down all the turnings, looking into all the wells, bolting in and out of all the cottages, dashing into the midst of all the dames' schools, fluttering all the pigeons, magnifying the tails of all the cats, and trotting into the public houses like a regular customer. Wherever he went, somebody or other might have been heard to cry, "Halloa! There's Boxer! Here's Boxer!" No, it keeps getting all tickly. And out came that somebody forthwith, accompanied by at least 2 or 3 other somebodies, to give John Peerybingle and his pretty wife good day. The packages and parcels for the errand cart were numerous, and there were many stoppages to take them in and give them out, which were not by any means the worst parts of the journey. Some people were so full of expectation about their parcels, and other people were so full of wonder about their parcels, and other people were so full of inexhaustible directions about their parcels, and John had such a lively interest in all the parcels, that it was as good as a play. Likewise, there were articles to carry, which required to be considered and discussed, and in reference to the adjustment and disposition of which, councils had to be holden by the carrier and the senders, at which Boxer usually assisted. In short fits of the closest attention, and long fits of tearing round and round the assembled sages, and barking himself hoarse. Of all these little incidents, Dot was the amused and open-eyed spectatress from her chair in the cart, and as she sat there looking on, a charming little portrait framed to admiration by the tilt. There was no lack of nudging and glancing and whispering and envying among the younger men, I promise you. And this delighted John the carrier beyond measure, for he was proud to have his little wife admired, knowing that she didn't mind it, that if anything, she rather liked it perhaps. The trip was a little foggy, to be sure, in the January weather. It was raw and cold. But who cared for such trifles? Not Dot, decidedly. Not Tilly Slowboy. For she deemed sitting in the car on any terms to be the highest position of human joys, the crowning circumstances of earthly hopes. Not the baby, I'll be sworn, for it's not in baby's nature to be warmer or more sound asleep, though its capacity is great in both respects, than the blessed young Peerybingle was all the way. You couldn't see very far in the fog, of course, but you could see a great deal. It's astonishing how much you may see in a thicker fog than that, if you will only take the trouble to look for it. Why, even to sit watching for the fairy rings in the fields, and for the patches of hoarfrost still lingering in the shade, near hedges and by trees, was a pleasant occupation. to make no mention of the unexpected shapes in which the trees themselves came starting out of the mist and gliding into it again. The hedges were tangled and bare, and waved a multitude of blighted garlands in the wind. But there was no discouragement in this. It was agreeable to contemplate, for it made the fireside warmer in possession, and the summer greener in expectancy. The river looked chilly, but it was in motion, and moving at a good pace, which was a great point. The canal was rather slow and torpid. That must be admired. Never mind. It would freeze the sooner when the frost set fairly in. And then there would be skating and sliding, and the heavy old barges, frozen up somewhere near a wharf, would smoke their rusty iron chimney pipes all day, and have a lazy time of it. In one place there was a great mound of weeds or stubble burning, and they watched the fire, so white in the daytime, flaring through the fog, which only here and there a dash of red in it, until in consequence, as she observed of the smoke, getting up her nose, Miss Slowboy choked. She could do anything of that sort on the smallest provocation, and woke the baby, who wouldn't go to sleep again. But Boxer, who was in advance some quarter of a mile or so, had already passed the outpost of the town, and gained the corner of the street where Caleb and his daughter lived. And long before they had reached the door, he and the blind girl were on the pavement waiting to receive them. Boxer, by the way, made certain delicate distinctions of his own in his communication with Bertha, which persuaded me fully that he never knew her to be blind. He never sought to attract her attention by looking at her, as he often did with other people, but touched her invariably. What experience he could have ever had of blind people, or blind dogs, I don't know. He had never lived with a blind master, nor had Mr. Boxer the elder, nor Mr. Boxer, nor any of his respectable family on either side, ever been visited with blindness. That I am aware of. He may have found it out for himself, perhaps, but he had got hold of it somehow. And therefore he had hold of Bertha, too, by the skirt, and kept hold until Mrs. Peerybingle and the baby, and Miss Slowboy and the basket, were all got safely within doors. May Fielding was already come, and so was her mother, a little querulous chip of an old lady with a peevish face, who, in right of having preserved a waist like a bedpost, was supposed to be a most transcendent figure, and who, in consequence of having one been better off, or of labouring under an impression that she might have been, if something had happened, which never did happen, and seemed to have never been particularly likely to come to pass. But it's all the same, was very genteel and patronizing indeed. Gruff and Tackleton was also there, doing the agreeable, with the evident sensation of being perfectly at home, and as unquestionably of his own element, as a fresh young Solomon at the top of the Great Pyramid. "May, my dear old friend," cried Dot, running up to meet her, "what a happiness to see you!" Her old friend was, to the full, as hearty and as glad as she, and it really was, if you'll believe me, quite a pleasant sight to see them embrace. Tackleton was a man of taste beyond all question. May was very pretty. You know sometimes when you are used to a pretty face, how when it comes into contact and comparison with other pretty faces, it seems for the moment to be homely and faded, and hardly to deserve the high opinion you've had of it. Now, this was not at all the case, either with Dot or May, for May's face set off Dot's, and Dot's face set off May's so naturally and agreeably that, as John Peerybingle was very near saying when he came into the room, they ought to have been born sisters, which was the only improvement you could have suggested. Tackleton had brought his leg of mutton, and, wonderful to relate, a tart besides. But we don't mind a little dissipation when our brides are in the case. We don't get married every day, and in addition to these dainties, there were the veal and ham pie and things, as Mrs. Peerybingle called them, which were chiefly nuts and oranges and cakes and such small deer. When the repast was set forth on the board, flanked by Caleb's contribution, which was a great wooden bowl of smoking potatoes, he was prohibited by solemn compact from producing any other viands. Tackleton led his intended mother-in-law to the post of honor. For the better gracing of this place at the high festival, the majestic old soul had adorned herself with a cap, calculated to inspire the thoughtless with sentiment of awe. She also wore gloves, but let us be genteel or die. Caleb sat next to his daughter. Dot and her old schoolfellow were side by side. The good carrier took care of the bottom of the table, and Miss Slowboy was isolated for the time being. For every article of furniture but the chair she sat on, that she might have nothing else to knock the baby's head against. As Tilly stared about her and at the dolls and toys, they stared at her and at the company. The venerable old gentlemen at the street doors, who were all in full action, showed a special interest in the party, pausing occasionally before leaping as if they were listening to the conversation, and then plunging wildly over and over, a great many times without halting for breath, as in a frantic state of delight with the whole proceedings. Certainly, if these old gentlemen were inclined to have fiendishly enjoy in the contemplation of Tackleton's discomfiture, they had good reason to be satisfied. Tackleton couldn't get on at all, and the more cheerful his intended bride became in Dot's society, the less he liked it, though he had brought them together for that purpose. For he was a regular dog in the manger. For he was a regular dog in the manger, was Tackleton, and when they laughed and he couldn't, he took it into his head immediately that they must be laughing at him. "Ah, May," said Dot, "dear, dear, what changes! To talk of those merry school days makes one young again." "Why, you aren't particularly old at any time, are you?" said Tackleton. "Look at my sober, plodding husband there," returned Dot. "He adds 20 years to my age at least, don't you, John?" 40, John replied. "How many you'll add to May's, I'm sure I don't know," said Dot, laughing. "But she can't be much less than 100 years of age on her next birthday," laughed Tackleton, hollow as a drum. That laugh, though. And he looked as if he could have twisted Dot's neck comfortably. "Dear, dear," said Dot, "only to remember how we used to talk at school about the husbands we would choose. I don't know how young and how handsome and How gay and how lively mine was not to be. And as to May's, ah dear, I don't know whether to laugh or cry when I think what silly girls we were. May seemed to know which to do, for the color flushed into her face and tears stood in her eyes. Even the very persons themselves, real live young men, we fixed on sometimes, said Dot. We thought how things would come about. I never fixed on John, I'm sure. I never so much as thought of him. And if I had told you you were ever to be married to Mr. Tackleton, why, you'd slapped me. Wouldn't you, May? Though May didn't say yes, she certainly didn't say no, or express no by any means. Tackleton laughed, quite shouted. He laughed so loud, John Peerybingle laughed too in his ordinary good-natured and contented manner. But his was a mere whisper of a laugh to Tackleton's. You couldn't help yourself for all that. You couldn't resist us, you see, said Tackleton. Here we are. Where are your gay young bridegrooms now? Some of them are dead, said Dot, and some of them forgotten. Some of them, if they could stand among us at this moment, would not believe we were the same creatures, would not believe that what they saw and heard was real, and we could forget them so. No, they would not believe one word of it. Why, Dot? Exclaimed the carrier. Little woman. She had spoken with such earnestness and fire that she stood in need of some recalling to herself without doubt. Her husband's check was very gentle, for he merely interfered, as he supposed, to shield old Tackleton. But it proved effectual, for she stopped and said no more. There was an uncommon agitation, even in her silence, which the wary Tackleton, who had brought himself half shut-eyed to bear upon her, noted closely, and remembered to some purpose too, as you will see. May uttered no word, good or bad, but sat quite still with her eyes cast down, and made no sign of interest in what had passed. The good lady, her mother, now interposed, observing in the first instance that girls were girls, and bygones bygones, and that so long as young people were young and thoughtless, they would probably conduct themselves like young and thoughtless persons, with 2 or 3 other positions of a no less sound and incontrovertible character. She then remarked, in a devout spirit, that she thanked heaven she had always found in her daughter's May a dutiful and obedient child, for which she took no credit to herself, though she had every reason to believe it was entirely owing herself. With regard to Mr. Tackleton, she said that he was in a moral point of view an undeniable individual, and that he was in an eligible point of view a son-in-law to be desired. No one in their senses could doubt. She was very emphatic here, with regard to the family into which he was soon about, after some solicitation, to be admitted. She believed Mr. Tackleton knew that. Although reduced in purse, it had some pretensions to gentility, and if certain circumstances not wholly unconnected, she would go so far as to say, with the indigo trade, but to which she would not more particularly refer. Rain. Oh God, my mind is getting hazy again. Do not fall asleep, please. We still have this much to go. Wah. Where was I? Where should I start? Oh no. Oh no. The sleepies. Well, I've certainly lasted a little longer. I've lasted like 2 hours. Wah. With regard to the family into which he was soon about, after some solicitation to be admitted, she believed Mr. Tackleton knew that, although reduced in purse, it had some pretensions to gentility, and if certain circumstances not holding it connected, she would go so far as to say with the indigo trade, but to which she would not more particularly refer, and had happened differently. It might perhaps have been in possession of wealth. She then remarked that she would not allude to the past, and would not mention that her daughter had for some time rejected the suit of Mr. Tackleton, and that she would not say a great many other things which she did say at great length. Finally, she delivered it as a general result of her observation and experience that those marriages in which there was least of what was romantically and sillily called love were always the happiest, and that she anticipated the greatest possible amount of bliss, not rapturous bliss, but the solid, steady-going article, from the approaching nuptials. She concluded by informing the company that tomorrow was the day she had lived for, expressly, and that when it was over, she would desire nothing better than to be packed up and disposed of in any genteel place of burial. As these remarks were quite unanswerable, which is the happy property of all remarks that are sufficiently wide of the purpose, they changed the current of that conversation, and diverted the general attention to the veal and ham pie, the cold mutton and potatoes, and the tart. In order that the bottled beer might not be slighted, John Peerybingle proposed tomorrow, the wedding day, and called upon them to drink a bumper to it, before he proceeded on his journey. For you ought to know that he only rested there, and gave the old horse a bait. He had to go some 4 or 5 miles farther on, and when he returned in the evening, he called for Dot, and took another rest on his way home. This was the order of the day, on all the picnic occasions, had been ever since their institution. There were 2 persons present beside the bride and bridegroom-elect, who did but indifferent honor to the toast. One of these was Dot, too flushed and discomposed to adapt herself to any small occurrence of the moment. The other, Bertha, who rose up hurriedly before the rest and left the table. "Good-bye," said stout John Peerybingle, pulling out on his dreadnought coat. "I shall be back at the old time. Good-bye, all." "Good-bye, John," returned Caleb. He seemed to say it by rote, and to wave his hand in the same unconscious manner, for he stood observing Bertha with an anxious, wandering face that never altered its expression. "Good-bye, young shaver," said the jolly carrier, bending down to kiss the child, which Tilly Slowboy, now intent upon a knife and fork, had deposited to sleep, and, strange to say, without damage, in a little cot of Bertha's furnishing. "Good-bye. Time will come, I suppose, when you'll turn out into the cold, my little friend, and leave your old father to enjoy his pipe and his rheumatics in the chimney corner, eh? Where's Dot? I'm here, I'm here, John, she said, starting. Come, come, returned the carrier, clapping his sounding hands. Where's the pipe? I quite forgot the pipe, John. Forgot the pipe? Was such a wonder ever heard of? She? Forgot the pipe? I'll fill it directly. It's soon done. But it was not soon done either. It lay in the usual place. The carrier's dreadnought pocket with the little pouch, her own works, from which she was used to fill it. But her hand shook so that she entangled it, and yet her hand was small enough to have come out easily, I'm sure, and bungled terribly. The filling of the pipe and lighting it, those little offices in which I have commended her discretion, were villily done. Were villily done from first to last. Vilely done from first to last. During the whole process, Tackleton stood looking on maliciously with the half-closed eye, which, whenever it met hers, or caught it, for it can hardly be said to have ever met another eye, rather being a kind of trap to snatch it up, augmented her confusion in the most remarkable degree. Please stop having these reading, thank you. Why, what a clumsy dot you are this afternoon, said John. I could have done it better myself, I verily believe. With these good-natured words, he strode away, and presently was heard, in company with Boxer and the old horse, and the cart making lively music down the road. What time the dreamy Caleb still stood, watching his blind daughter with the same expression on his face. Bertha, said Caleb softly, what has happened? How changed you are, my darling, in a few hours, since this morning. You, silent and dull all day. What is it? Tell me. Oh, father, father, cried the blind girl, bursting into tears. Oh, my hard, hard fate. Caleb drew his hand across his eyes before he answered her. But think how cheerful and happy you've been, Bertha. How good and how much loved by many people. That strikes me to the heart, dear father. Always so mindful of me. Always so kind to me. Caleb was very much perplexed to understand her. To be blind, Bertha, my poor dear, he faltered, is a great affliction. But I have never felt it, cried the blind girl. I have never felt it in its fullness. Never. I have sometimes wished that I could see you, or could see him. Only once, dear father. Only for one little minute, that I might know what it is I treasure up. She laid her hands upon her breast, she laid her hands upon her breast, and hold there, that I might be sure and have it right. And sometimes, but then I was a child, I have wept in my prayers at night to think that when your images ascended from my heart to heaven, they might not be the true resemblance of yourself. But I have never had these feelings long. They have passed away and left me tranquil and contented. And they will again, said Caleb. But, father, oh, my good gentle father, bear with me, if I am wicked, said the blind girl. This is not the sorrow that so weighs me down. Her father could not choose but let his moist eyes overflow. She was so earnest and pathetic, but he did not understand her yet. Bring her to me, said Bertha. I cannot hold it closed. I cannot hold it closed and shut within myself. Bring her to me, father. She knew he hesitated and said, May. Bring May. May heard the mention of her name, and coming quietly towards her, touched her on her arm. The blind girl turned immediately, and held her by both hands. Look into my face, dear heart, sweetheart, said Bertha. Read it with your beautiful eyes, and tell me if the truth is written on it. Dear Bertha, yes. The blind girl still upturning the blank, sightless face down with... The blind girl still upturning the blank, sightless face down, which the tears were coursing fast, addressed her in these words. There is not in my soul a wish or thought that is not for your good, bright May. There is not in my soul a grateful recollection stronger than the deep remembrance which is stored there, of the many times when, in the full pride of sight and beauty, you had consideration for blind Bertha. Even when we two were children, or when Bertha was as much a child or ever blindness can be. Or when Bertha was as much a child as ever blindness can be. Every blessing on your head, light upon your happy course. Not the less, my dear May. And she drew towards her in her closer grasp. Not the less, my bird, because today the knowledge that you are here to be his wife has wrung my heart almost to breaking. Father, May, Mary, oh, forgive me that it is so, for the sake of all he has done to relieve the weariness of my dark life, and for the sake of the belief you have in me, when I call heaven to witness that I could not wish him married to a wife more worthy of his goodness. While speaking, she had released May Fielding's hands and clasped her garments in an attitude of mingled supplication and love, sinking lower and lower down as she proceeded in her strange confession. She dropped at last at the feet of her friend, and hid her blind face in the folds of her dress. Great power! Exclaimed her father, smitten at one blow with the truth. Have I deceived her from the cradle, but to break her heart at last? It was well for all of them that Dot, that beaming, useful, busy little Dot, for such she was, whatever faults she had, and however you may learn to hate her in good time. It was well for all of them, I say, that she was there, or where this would have ended, it were hard to tell. But Dot, recovering her self-possession, interposed before May could reply, or Caleb could say another word. Come, come, my dear Bertha, come away with me. Give her your arm, May. So, how how composed she is, you see? So, how composed she is, you see, already, and how good it is of her to mind us, said the cheery little woman, kissing her upon her forehead. Come away, dear Bertha, come, and here's her good father. Will come with her, won't you, Caleb? To be sure. Well, well, he was a noble little Dot in such things. Ah, to be sure. Yes. Well, well, she was a noble little Dot in such things, and it must have been an obdurate nature that could have withstood her influence. When she had got poor Caleb and his Bertha away, that they might comfort and console each other, as she knew they only could, she presently came bouncing back. The saying is, as fresh as any daisy, I say fresher, to mount guard over that bridling little piece of consequence in the cap and gloves, and prevent the dear old creature from making discoveries. So bring me the precious baby, Tilly, said she, drawing a chair to the fire. And while I have it in my lap, here's Mrs. Fielding. Here's Mrs. Fielding, Tilly. Tilly will tell me about the management of babies. What? What? Brain broke. Can't think. Reading. Sorry. So bring me the precious baby, Tilly, she said, drawing a chair to the fire. And while I have it in my lap, here's Mrs. Fielding, Tilly. Tilly will tell me about all the management of babies and put me right in 20 points where I am as wrong as can be. Won't you, Mrs. Fielding? Not even the Welsh giant who, according to the popular expression, was so slow as to perform a fatal surgical operation upon himself, in emulation of a juggling trick achieved by his arch-enemy at breakfast time. Not even he fell half readily into the snare prepared for him, as the old lady did into this artful pitfall. The fact of Tackleton having walked out, and furthermore, of 2 or 3 people having been talking together at a distance for 2 minutes, leaving her to her own resources, was quite enough to have put her on her dignity, and the bewilderment of that mysterious convulsion in the indigo trade for 24 hours. But this, becoming a difference to her experience, on the part of the young mother, was so irresistible that after a short affectation of humility, she began to enlighten her with the best grace in the world, and sitting bolt upright before the wicked dot, she did, in half an hour, deliver more infallible domestic recipes and precepts that would, if acted on, have utterly destroyed and done up that young Perry-Bingle, though he had been an infant Samson. Infant Samson? There's so many. Pages. This might have to continue after Christmas. To change the theme, Dot did a little needlework. She carried the contents of a whole work-box in her pocket. However she contrived it, I don't know. Then did a little nursing, a little more needlework, then had a little whispering chat with May, while the old lady dozed, and so, in little bits of bustle, which was quite her manner always, found it a very short afternoon. Then, as it grew dark, and as it was a solemn part of this institution of the picnic that she should perform all Bertha's household tasks, she trimmed the fire, and swept the hearth, and set the tea-board out, and drew the curtain, and lighted a candle. Then she played an air or 2 on a rude kind of harp, which Caleb had contrived for Bertha, and played them very well, for nature had made her delicate little ear as choice a one for music as it would have been for jewels. If she had had any to wear, Stop falling asleep. Stop it. By this time, it was the established hour for having tea, and Tackleton came back again, to share the meal and spend the evening. Caleb and Bertha had returned some time before, and Caleb had sat down to his afternoon's work. But he couldn't settle to it, poor fellow, being anxious and remorseful for his daughter. It was touching to see him sitting idle on his working stool, regarding her so wistfully, and always saying in his face, "I've deceived her from her cradle, but to break her heart." When it was night, and tea was done, and Dot had nothing more to do in washing up the cups and saucers, in a word, for I must come to it, and there is no use in putting it off. When the time drew nigh for expecting the carrier's return, and every sound of distant wheels, her manner changed again. Her color came and went, and she was very restless. Not as good wives are when listening for their husbands. No. It was another sort of restlessness from that. Wheels hard, a horse's feet, the barking of a dog, and the gradual approach of all the sounds. The scratching paw of Boxer at the door. "Whose step is that?" cried Bertha, starting up. "Whose step?" returned the carrier, standing in the portal, with his brown face ruddy as a winter berry from the keen night air. From the keen night air. "Why, mine." "The other step," said Bertha. "The man's tread behind you." "She is not to be deceived," observed the carrier, laughing. "Come along, sir, you'll be welcome, never fear." He spoke in a loud tone, and as he spoke, the deaf old gentleman entered. "He's not so much a stranger that you haven't seen him once, Caleb," said the carrier. "You'll give him house room till we go?" "Oh, surely, John, and take it as an honor." "He's the best company on earth to talk secrets in," said John. "I have reasonable good lungs, but he tries 'em, I can tell you. Sit down, sir. All friends here, and glad to see you." When he had imparted this assurance in a voice that amply corroborated what he had said about his lungs, he added in his natural tone, "A chair in the chimney corner, and leave to sit quite silent and look pleasantly about him, is all he cares for. He's easily pleased." Bertha had been listening intently. She called Caleb to her side, when he had set the chair, and asked him in a low voice to describe their visitor. When he had done so, truly now, with scrupulous fidelity, she moved, for the first time since he had come in, and sighed, and seemed to have no further interest concerning him. The carrier was in high spirits, good fellow that he was, and fonder on his little wife than ever. "A clumsy Dot she was this afternoon," he said, encircling her with his rough arm as he stood removed from the rest. "And yet I like her somehow. See yonder Dot." He pointed to the old man. She looked down. I think she trembled. He's full of admiration for you," said the carrier. "Talked of nothing else the whole way here. Why, he's a brave old boy. I like him for it." "I wish he had a better subject, John," she said, with an uneasy glance about the room, at Tackleton especially. "A better subject?" cried the jovial John. "There is no such thing. Come, off with the great coat. Off with the thick shawl. Off with the heavy wrappers, and a cozy half-hour by the fire. My humble service, mistress." A game of cribbage A game at cribbage, you and I? That's hearty. The cards and board, Dot, and a glass of beer here, if there's any left, small wife. His challenge was addressed to the old lady, who, accepting it with gracious readiness, they were soon engaged upon the game. At first, the carrier looked about him sometimes with a smile, or now and then called Dot to peep over his shoulder at his hand, and advise him on some knotty point. But his adversary, being a rigid disciplinarian, and subject to an occasional weakness in respect of pegging more than she was entitled to, required such vigilance on his part as left him neither eye nor ears to spare. Thus his whole attention gradually became absorbed upon the cards, and he thought of nothing else, until a hand upon his shoulder restored him to a consciousness of Tackleton. "I am sorry to disturb you, but a word directly." "I'm going to deal," returned the carrier. "It's a crisis." "It is," said Tackleton. "Come here, man." There was that in his pale face which made the others rise immediately, and ask him in a hurry what the matter was. "Hush, John Peerybingle," said Tackleton. "I am sorry for this. I am indeed. I have been afraid of it. I suspected it from the first." "What is it?" said the courier, with a frightened aspect. "Hush! I'll show you if you'll come with me." The carrier accompanied him without another word. They went across a yard where the stars were shining, and by a little side door into Tackleton's own counting-house were there a glass window commanding the ware-room, which was closed for the night. There was no light in the counting-house itself, but there were lamps in the long, narrow ware-room, and consequently the window was bright. "A moment," said Tackleton. "Can you bear to look through the window, do you think?" "Why not?" returned the carrier. "A moment more," said Tackleton. "Don't commit any violence. It's of no use. It's dangerous, too. You're a strong-made man, and you might do murder before you know it." The carrier looked him in the face and recoiled a step as if he had been struck. In one stride he was at the window, and he saw. "Oh, shadows on the hearth! Oh, truthful cricket! Oh, perfidious wife!" He saw her with the old man, old no longer, but erect and gallant, bearing in his hand the false white hair that had won his way into their desolate and miserable home. He saw her listening to him, as he bent his head to whisper in her ear, and suffering him to clasp her around the waist, as they moved slowly down the dim wooden gallery toward the door by which they had entered it. He saw them stop, and saw her turn. To have the face he loved so presented to his view, and saw her, with her own hands, adjust the lie upon his head, laughing as she did it, at his unsuspicious nature. He clutched his strong right hand at first, as if it would have beaten down a lion, but opening it immediately again, he spread it out before the eyes of Tackleton, for he was tender of her even then, and so, as they passed on, fell down upon the desk, and was as weak as any infant. He wrapped up to the chin, and busy with his horse and parcels when she came into the room, preparing for going home. "Now, John dear, good night, May. Good night, Bertha." Could she kiss them? Could she blithe and cheerful in her parting? Could she venture to reveal her face to them without a blush? Yes, Tackleton observed her closely, and she did all this. Tilly was hushing the baby, and she crossed and recrossed Tackleton "A dozen times," repeated drowsily. Did the knowledge that it was to be its wives did the knowledge that it was to be its wives, then, wring its heart almost to breaking? Did its fathers deceive it from its cradles, but to break its hearts at last? "Now, Tilly, give me the baby. Good night, Mrs. Tackleton. Where's John, for goodness sake?" "He's going to walk beside the horse's head," said Tackleton, who helped her to her seat. "My dear John, walk? Tonight?" The muffled figure of her husband made a hasty sign in the affirmative, and the false stranger and the little nurse being in their places, the old horse moved off. Boxer, the unconscious Boxer, running on before, running back, running round and round the cart, and barking as triumphantly and merry as ever. When Tackleton had gone off likewise, escorting May and her mother home, poor Caleb sat down by the fire beside his daughter, anxious and remorseful at the core, and still saying in his wistful contemplation of her, "Have I deceived her from her cradle, but to break her heart at last?" The toys that had been set in motion for the baby had all stopped and run down long ago. In the faint light and silence, the imperturbably calm dolls, imperturbably, the imperturbably calm dolls, the agitated rocking horses, with the scented eyes and nostrils, the old gentleman at the street door, standing half doubled up upon their falling knees and ankles, the wry-faced nutcrackers, the very beasts upon their way into the ark, in twos like a boarding school out walking, might have been imagined to be stricken motionless with fantastic wonder at Dot being false, or Tackleton beloved, under any combination of circumstances. All right. I'll have to take another break. We will continue this when I am rested and ready to read again. I fear that I may pass out at any moment again. So, with that being said, thank you all for coming by. Well, this read is not over, and neither is Christmas, for it is still Christmas now. 2 a.m. There's still time for us to finish the story, not to worry. So, you guys have a good day, and I hope this read has helped relax you a little while. Have a good night if you are to sleep, or if you are to wake. What were you doing sitting here? I was reading. Reading has always been historically known to make people sleepy, you silly fool. But if you are free today, and you just wish to laze about, go ahead. It's the day for it. Have a good one. See you in the next one, guys.